Hey, I'm John. This is Mr. G's Workbench. If this is your first time stopping in, thanks for coming by and giving us a look. If you're a return visitor, thanks for coming back. We're on part 3 of Kitty Hawk's MiG-25PU build. Last time we got the nose assembly finished. This time we're going to look to get that nose assembly put into the fuselage. We're going to get the intakes installed as well, the main gear bays, and we're going to get the exhausts assembled and installed. Hopefully by the end of this part, we'll have something resembling an aircraft fuselage, and we'll take a look at what goes on with it, and we'll see what we like, what we don't like. As always, thanks again to Jim and Kitmaker Network for providing the kit that we're looking at, and let's get right into it.
So let's jump back in with step 9, which is the exhausts, D9 and D11. Take a quick look at these. I haven't cleaned them up yet. You got really nice detail on the inside for the exhaust. Got the ribbing in there from the exhaust tubes, which will be good. And since it runs lengthwise, that'll actually work out in terms of I don't think we have to sweat seams too much. Hopefully the seams will be minimal, kind of be disguised by this ribbing. I haven't trimmed these tabs off yet there. These tabs are on all of these pieces. We'll have to go and trim those off. And then one piece of each exhaust has these 2 tabs in it. Those will fit into slots on the lower fuselage later. You've got D4 is this, I guess, the fan. For some reason, every Kitty Hawk part has these ejector tabs. I mean, they're huge. I mean, just snip them off. Nobody's going to see the back of this ever, so it doesn't make a difference, but they're prevalent on a lot of the parts. F1 and F2 are going to go on the front of those fans, the exhaust. And again, you got those nice little ejector pin things, remnants, whatever they're called. So you got those. You've got D10 and D12 are the other exhaust. And then you've got this part here, E14, which is, I guess, the face of the exhausts when you get outside of the fuselage. And then they have these H parts. I'm not convinced that I need to do that right now because this will shore everything up outside of the fuselage. So I'll paint these. Not worried about they have you painting the outside of these. I don't think I'm going to sweat that because nobody's ever going to see them. So let me get these painted, let me get these painted, and then we'll see what the assembly looks like, and then we'll start fitting it into the fuselage. So I noticed while dry fitting the exhausts into the fuselage halves, I noticed that I was winding up with this gap here on both sides. I couldn't figure out what it was until I looked here. If you look up here, there's notches to accommodate this shape in the fuselage, these cutouts, but they don't exist. They don't have the notches here and here. Make sure you notch that out. Nobody's going to see it anyway, and that's obviously what's keeping that from closing. All right, a little time has elapsed, and I've assembled and painted the exhausts. What I did was after I assembled them, I used some, you can't even read the label. I used this Vallejo plastic putty to fill the seams on the insides of the exhausts. I mean, it's good stuff for that purpose. I just took a toothpick and I ran it along the 2 seams from where they join, let it dry, and then I used a cotton bud with a little bit of, I like to use Tamiya X20A to clean the excess off. And then I sprayed these. I initially sprayed the entire tube with a coat of Tamiya, it's wooden deck tan, and then I sprayed that from the front and the back to fill it up, to give it an even coat. Then from the back I sprayed a coat of Tamiya khaki, and then what I did is I started on a hard angle to the sides, the inside of the very front here, to get it coated, and then I gradually turned my airbrush on more of an angle to spray in until it just makes it to the outsides of the of the exhausts. After that, I took a little bit of MRP black and I just did a quick skim coat on the very front section of each. Then I set those aside. I painted the exhaust faces. That's still wet. That's why it looks so shiny. I initially sprayed the whole thing with that same khaki just to give it a base coat. I then went back and I used this. Used MRP Russian green. 032 is the number of the color. I gave it a light coat, mainly emphasizing the very center of each exhaust, and then faded it out. And then I came back when I sprayed that black on the inside of the exhausts. I just hit the very outside ring with that black. And then at the end, I just finished applying a black wash to everything. I kind of like this Vallejo black wash. It's a water-based wash. I just put a couple of drops into a container. Then I add about 3 or 4 more drops of water to cut it down. And then I just applied a quick black wash over everything because it is exhausts and they are going to be dirty. We'll assemble these and then we'll come back. We'll get ready to put them into the lower fuselage. So let's assemble the exhausts onto the exhaust fans, I suppose. These are actually handed for some reason. One tab on top is larger than the other tab, so just keep an eye on that when you assemble this. So before we go on, let's discuss what Kitty Hawk would have you do here in step 9. They had you assemble these, the exhaust fans and the actual exhaust cans. Then they want you to take part E14. They want you to install it onto the ends of the exhausts and then build up the exhaust pedals H6, 7, 8, and 5. Now, to me, this is going to make it harder to paint later because you're going to have these metal parts, the metal colored parts of the exhaust pedals, but the rest of the plane has to get painted green. You're going to have to do a lot of masking. So what I did instead was, after I had assembled the exhaust cans, I had set them, I dry fit them into part D4. And then I built the exhaust pedals as a separate item. So this is a combination of E14 and then H5, 6, 7, and 8. And what I did was I took E14, I placed it lightly onto the assembled exhaust cans, and then I built up the H parts, the pedals, onto part E14 while it was sitting, because this way I could ensure that I had everything fit properly and that everything would eventually sit flush. And now what I can do is I can paint it separately as a unit and install it onto the plane at the end after I paint the plane. And then, by the way, I've painted the inside of the exhaust with that MRP Russian green 032. So the inside of that will stay Russian green. And what will happen when the time comes is I'll just mask that inside off, and then the pedals, the outside of the pedals, as well as this little sliver of pedal that you can see beyond the green, that'll all get painted metallic colors later on. So let's set that aside. Step 10 is going to have us install these exhaust cans and the wheel bays into A2, which is this. This is the lower fuselage. I've already taken the liberty. You can see the panel lines and stuff. I've already gone in. I tried to sand off. There were some mold seams along here on both sides and back here, like running right along just above those circles on both sides. So it looks like that's 2 parts of the mold that came together, but it wasn't even. So I went back and I sanded it. The line you see is kind of a ghost seam from after I sanded it, and the ink still kind of got on it and stained it. So I did the same thing I did with the front of the fuselage. I went back, I rescribed the lines that were, the panel lines that were shallow. I took my little punch thing and I went back and repunched all the shallow rivets. We're going to take the exhausts now. Let's see how they fit into this lower fuselage half. Looks like that's going to work. All right. Now my concern going forward is going to be when we have to add the top in step 11. They're going to have us add the top of the fuselage on, and during my dry fit of the two halves, I've already noticed there's going to be an issue. It's terrific that Kitty Hawk has provided pins and holes to locate the wing areas of the two fuselage halves, but that is it. Besides that, if you look here, there's absolutely no locating tabs. There's no pins, no holes, nothing to get the two halves to sit properly. So based on the dry fitting I've done, what I'm going to be doing, because the top half sits wide of the bottom half, is I'm gonna glue some pieces of styrene, some flat styrene. I'll probably put like 3 pieces here and 3 pieces here. I'll show that to you when I do it. And then hopefully when we go to put them together, that'll spread the lower half apart enough that we can get it somewhat even fit. Let's get the exhausts installed. Also, don't forget, I showed earlier, you have to cut a couple of extra notches in the bottom of the exhausts to accommodate these odd shaped spots that kind of dip in a little. I can only guess that these are in based on the fact that, yes, Dexter, based on the fact that they're not moving. So what I'm going to do, they appear to be in the right place. I'm going to put some cement on this, and then I'm going to let Dexter go outside because he's getting a little whiny. Those notches for those lower stabilizer things. While the exhaust had other cutouts to accommodate the rest of the things that stick out, it didn't have anything to cover that. So that seems to be in place. Now we're going to go back and let's take a look at the fit of these gear bays. Now I'm going to say right off the bat, self-fulfilled prophecy. I did a dry fit earlier of the gear bays into the lower fuselage, and as I expected, the little pins that were sticking out of here, no matter how carefully I tried to wiggle these into place, those pins were going to get caught up on the sides of the fuselage. So my advice, and I think you can install them after the fact, wait till you install, even though you're going to have to put these legs on, wait till you install the gear bays before you put these parts on, and save yourself a bit of grief. Everything's in place. I think we're good. I've clamped everything. I'm going to leave it dry. And by the magic of video, when you come back, we'll blink our eyes and it'll be, after these bays are nice and dry, I've cemented them along the sides. The one thing I'll give Kitty Hawk credit for, when certain things fit together properly, they snap into place, which is great. These bays, if you just put them in on an angle, watch the gear legs, which you don't have much of a choice with, and then push them up flat against the side of the fuselage, they literally snapped right in. My concerns about the gear legs are somewhat tempered for the moment because they seem to be very rigid. I'm hoping they stay that way. The exhausts fit in well. I don't know what these angular divots are in the engines, but I don't think they serve any purpose because there's nothing on them. So I'm going to let that set, and we'll look at the next step, step 11. We'll look at the installation of the top half. Here's a look at everything. The gear bay's installed. Like I said earlier, they snapped into place, no complaints there. The exhausts went in, no problem. As we discussed just a minute ago, there's no tabs, there's no pegs, nothing to hold it in. What I did was I found because of the curvature of this lower fuselage, these were in tighter than the top of the fuselage. So I glued 4 pieces of sheet styrene in. 1, 2, 3, 4. These were longer when I put them in because I wasn't sure how much pressure they were going to have to exert on the lower half. After some trimming, I also thinned these down. I sanded along the edges. Now, when you put everything together, it's almost a flush fit on both sides. So, hooray for me. I also started putting in the air brake cover, and I've assembled the parachute housing. I'm going to glue that on, and then there's lots of gaps here. It's too small because they, like everything on a Kitty Hawk kit, they want you to model it open. We're not modeling it open. So I've put this on. I'm going to run a bead of the Vallejo putty around the edges because that'll be easy to clean up, and also on the insides along the spine. I'll fill this in. I'm going to sand this flat, and at the same time I'll install this putty and fill that as well.
All right, fast forward. It's been 3 days. I didn't record the part where I attached this forward section to the rear section, and I'm going to tell you why. Number one, I was moving everywhere with this. There was no way I was going to get this on camera properly. I'll explain what I did, and then I'll discuss the results. What I did was I followed the directions. I attached the intake faces, these front parts of the intakes. I attached them using the pegs that are provided on the sides of the forward fuselage. I took that assembly and then I attached it to the rear half of the fuselage. And the order I did that in was I made my priority trying to get the top to fit as best as possible. There are 2 locating tabs here. I used those. I located everything in. I glued this and secured it on top. I let that dry, and then I went and tried to get each of these sides to match up with the side of the fuselage, which they didn't really do very well. What I wound up doing was I added little shims from plastic here. I think you can see that one a little better right there. So I shimmed these out so that they would sit a little more flush. Once I had these as close to flush as I could get them, I filled this gap here. It looks like a gap because it's filled with CA, so it's clear, but it feels pretty smooth now. I filled that gap and the one on the other side with CA. I did some CA on top. It was a little harder to be somewhat careful here with it. I did the best I could with it. I sanded all of this down. I sanded most of this detail off. Everything you see here has been re-scribed and re-riveted. You can see here, the fit here was terrible. Again, I filled this with CA. I filled it, I sanded it smooth. I wound up putting putty in to check it again. I added CA on top of that again. I've got this as best as I can get it. Same on top. I sanded off this panel line detail here. I sanded this flat just to try and get this to smooth out. It's still not perfectly smooth. Rescribing is not my strong point, so I've done my best to rescribe the detail here. I'm hoping that a good coat of primer will cover a world of sins. I then installed the remainder of the spine here, which naturally does not fit very well. I've puttied it. I'm going to wind up puttying it again. There were gaps along the bottom and along this spot on the spine where they join up. So that was the same issue. Here I haven't filled these gaps yet. I put the air brake door in. Then the piece that's the top of the air brake, for whatever reason, they made this two pieces that you have to put together. Then they connect to the air brake. Over-engineering at its best. This would have been better served as just a one continuous piece of the spine. It wasn't. So I glued that together, I installed it, and now I'm going to use the Vallejo white putty to fill these gaps on either side. I then put the parachute housing on. Again, that was a two-piece assembly. It fit like ass right here. I've puttied in, again, this is like up here. I've puttied and sanded this multiple times. I've tried to get the shape as best as I can to look reasonable. For my ability level, it's the best I can do. What I'm going to do before we go on is I'm going to attach as many pieces as I can. Those little stabilizing fins on the bottom I'm going to put in. There's some ribbing here to be put on. I'm going to install as much stuff as I can so that later on we've got as much of this plane in one piece to prime. But I'll show you the parts I'm going to put on now. All right, we've got everything assembled that we're going to put on, combining some of the parts from step 12 and a couple of the parts from step 11, D5 and D7. Here's D5 and D7, G16 and G17, H17 right here. These little tiny parts. We've got H42 we're going to put on, 20 and 21, 22 and 23, these small parts here. Anything you see highlighted, I typically highlight the parts that I'm not putting on at the moment so that when I go back and review everything at the end, I'll try to remember to put the rest of the pieces on. And then the last couple of pieces we're going to put on to wrap up today is going to be E1 and E2. So we're done for today in terms of assembly. I've added on all those parts I just showed you. The two pieces on the bottom here. We added the intake flaps, these little intake vents, and I believe there's some kind of mechanism for when the tail planes are in. I puttied and sanded this again, rescribed again over the spine. I filled in with white putty along here where there was there's a little divot now from sanding so much. So I've tried to keep that reasonable. So this is where we're at. And my desk is going to need a good wipe down with all the dust that's left on it from sanding. I wouldn't normally do this, but I took out my MiG-31 from AMK because I realized that they're similar airframes and some of the assembly is similar. The worst part so far has been fitting those intakes onto the fuselage. And when I went back and reviewed the AMK kit instructions, it's almost the same in terms of kit design. It's this forward section is separate and you install them as you build. But yet these aligned perfectly with the fuselage, with the rest of the available fuselage. I didn't have the same shape problems and fit problems as here. And of course AMK gives you full intakes so that you don't have the same issue you have here. Kitty Hawk, for some reason, Kitty Hawk likes to give you things. This kit was actually an exception, so I'm not going to say it. Kitty Hawk typically likes to leave every panel open, and it's actually more work to close the panels. On the MiG-25, they really didn't leave any panels open. There haven't been any panels to open. Thank goodness they didn't have engines that had to be assembled with detail on the outside that you'll never see. But the one thing they could have done was give you intakes. I mean, at least fake it halfway back and put, the fans, but they give you nothing. And as I said, the worst part of this kit so far has been the fit between these intakes and the back half of the fuselage. So hopefully when we put a coat of primer on it and take a look at it, it'll be better than I imagine it right now. So we'll leave it at that. We're done for today. And just again, I'd like to thank everybody for stopping in and watching. I'd like to thank the 22 people who've subscribed so far. Thank you very much. I hope you'll all come back again next time. If you like what you saw, like and subscribe. If you didn't like what you see, let me know and tell me why. I have no problem dealing with that. I'm not going to get upset. It's the internet, for crying out loud. Everyone's entitled to an opinion. If you saw something you didn't like, or if you disagree with something I did, or you have a better way to do something, leave me a note in the comments. I respond to all of the comments. And again, thank you all for stopping by. And we'll see you in part 4. We'll be getting started on the main wing assembly, and let's see what kind of fun we have with that.